The morning sky over Jerusalem was gray, the kind of sky that presses down on the city and makes every decision feel heavier. I sat alone in the underground strategic command room beneath the Prime Minister's office. As Prime Minister of Israel, I had spent years confronting threats that never disappeared, only evolved. But this moment was different. The maps spread across the table in front of me showed more than borders. They showed timelines, missile ranges, intelligence estimates, and a narrowing window of opportunity. Iran had moved steadily toward nuclear threshold capability. Our intelligence agencies disagreed on the exact timeline, but they agreed on one point. Once Iran crossed that threshold, Israel's freedom of action would shrink dramatically. For years, we had relied on a layered strategy: covert operations, cyber disruption, diplomatic pressure through our allies, quiet sabotage of supply chains, and infrastructure tied to Iran's nuclear program. These methods had slowed Iran's progress, but they had not stopped it. Now my advisors believed the final phase was approaching. The previous night, the Security Cabinet had met for nearly 6 hours. Military leaders presented operational plans. Intelligence officials outlined uncertainty. Economists warned about sanctions and global reaction. No one questioned the seriousness of the threat. The real question was whether Israel should act before Iran became untouchable. The room had grown silent when the Chief of Staff explained the most aggressive option: a coordinated missile and air campaign aimed not only at nuclear facilities, but at Iran's wider military command network. It was not a strike. It was a war. And if I approved it, the consequences would extend far beyond the battlefield. The decision now rested with me. The operational brief remained open on the screen in front of me. Israel's military planners had spent years preparing for this possibility. The strike package was designed to overwhelm Iran's defenses within the first hour. Ballistic missiles from hardened silos, long-range air sorties, cyber units disrupting radar and command networks, special operations targeting key communication nodes. The concept was simple in theory: remove Iran's ability to respond before it fully understood what was happening. But theory rarely survives first contact with reality. Iran possessed thousands of missiles. Many were dispersed, mobile, and difficult to track. Hezbollah in Lebanon had an even larger stockpile, pointed directly at our cities. If this operation began, retaliation would come quickly, and from multiple directions. Our missile defense systems were among the most advanced in the world: Iron Dome, David Sling, Arrow batteries. Together, they formed a layered shield. But no defense system was perfect. My defense minister had been blunt during the meeting. Even if interception rates remain high, he said, some missiles will get through. Civilian disruption is guaranteed. The economic impact was another variable. Israel's economy depended on global trade, financial markets, and technological partnerships. A regional war would trigger energy shocks and pressure from international markets. And then there was Washington. The United States remained Israel's most important strategic ally. Intelligence cooperation, advanced weapon systems, diplomatic backing at the United Nations. These were pillars of Israel's security. Launching a full-scale war without U.S. coordination could strain that relationship severely. But waiting also carried risk. If Iran crossed the nuclear threshold, the strategic balance of the entire Middle East would change. For Israel, a nuclear-armed adversary openly committed to our destruction was not an abstract problem. It was an existential one, which meant delay could be just as dangerous as action. The decision window was closing. By midnight, the debate inside the Security Cabinet had narrowed to 3 realistic options. The first was continuation of the current strategy: containment, intelligence operations, economic pressure through international partners, and covert disruption of Iran's nuclear infrastructure. It had worked before, buying us years of delay. But intelligence assessments now suggested Iran had hardened many facilities deep underground. Future sabotage might slow them, but likely not stop them. The second option was a limited strike: precision air operations against key nuclear facilities, missile depots, and command centers. The objective would be degradation, not regime collapse. It would send a clear signal and potentially push Iran's program back several years. But a limited strike carried its own risks. Iran would still retaliate. Hezbollah could open a northern front. And once the first missile was launched, escalation might move beyond our control. The third option was the most decisive and the most dangerous: a coordinated strategic assault designed to dismantle Iran's military command structure, suppress missile networks, and paralyze their national defense systems in the opening hours of the conflict. Military planners believed Israel had the technological edge to achieve temporary operational dominance. But dominance was not the same as stability. Even if Iranian defenses collapsed quickly, the aftermath would be unpredictable. Iran was a nation of more than 80 million people, with complex internal politics and powerful regional proxies. War on that scale would not end with the first strike. It would trigger a cascade of reactions across the region. Yet every intelligence briefing returned to the same uncomfortable conclusion: if Iran became a nuclear power, Israel's strategic position would deteriorate permanently. The cabinet members looked toward me. They had presented the options. Now they were waiting for a decision. I did not make the decision in the cabinet room. After the meeting ended, I remained behind, while the others filtered out into the corridor. The intelligence chief left the latest satellite images on the table. The chief of staff left a final operational readiness report. Israel's military was prepared. Missile units in the Negev had already moved to elevated readiness. Air Force squadrons were standing by at forward bases. Cyber units had spent months mapping Iranian communication networks. If I gave the order, the operation could begin within minutes. But preparation alone did not justify war. I reviewed the intelligence assessments again. The most concerning indicator was Iran's growing stockpile of highly enriched uranium. Our analysts estimated that once sufficient material was accumulated, weaponization could proceed quickly. The international negotiations meant to restrain that program had stalled. Enforcement mechanisms had weakened. Regional powers were beginning to hedge, exploring their own nuclear options. The Middle East was drifting toward a multi-state nuclear competition. For Israel, a country the size of a small American state, strategic depth had always been limited. Our security doctrine relied on deterrence, technological advantage, and the ability to act before threats became irreversible. Waiting had advantages. It preserved international legitimacy. It avoided immediate escalation. But waiting also meant accepting that the next phase of the region's strategic balance might unfold without us shaping it. I called the command center. The line connected instantly. My instructions were short and deliberate. Activate the strike plan. Target military infrastructure, command systems, and missile launch networks. Avoid civilian population centers wherever possible. Maintain defensive readiness across all fronts. Within minutes, the first stage of the operation began moving forward, and with it, a chain of consequences that could not be reversed. The first reports reached the command center before dawn. Israeli missile units had launched in coordinated waves, Long-range strike aircraft crossed multiple corridors simultaneously. Cyber teams disrupted Iranian early warning systems during the opening minutes of the operation. Initial military assessments suggested that several strategic command facilities and missile sites had been disabled. But the second wave of reports arrived just as quickly. Iranian retaliation had begun. Missile launches were detected from multiple locations across Iran. Within hours, additional launches came from Lebanon and Syria as allied proxy forces entered the conflict. Israel's missile defense network activated across the country, intercepting a large portion of incoming projectiles, but some still penetrated the defensive layers. Air raid sirens echoed across Israeli cities. Civil defense shelters filled. Airports suspended operations. Financial markets halted trading. At the same time, the diplomatic front ignited. Emergency sessions were called at the United Nations. European governments demanded immediate ceasefire negotiations. Oil prices surged within hours, sending shockwaves through global markets. Washington requested urgent consultations, concerned about rapid regional escalation. Inside the command center, the operational picture remained fluid. Israeli forces had achieved early tactical success, but Iran's military capacity was far from eliminated. War, once started, rarely followed a controlled script. As Prime Minister, I understood that the first strike had only resolved one question. The larger one remained. Could Israel absorb the political, economic, and military cost of a conflict that might stretch far beyond the initial operation? History would judge the decision. But history never carries the responsibility of making it.